I suppose when you think it's 50 years since the school was established, to cover 50 years in just a few thoughts over 5 or 10 minutes, it's not realistic. So maybe it's really a few thoughts on frankness and maybe looking at Dublin just in terms of the change. We talked about incremental change. Sometimes incremental change makes the city invisible. When you look at the trajectory of Dublin over 50 years, there are a whole set of circumstances and factors which have led to a greatly improved city. And I suppose you could call the point we're at now the given city, and the next 30 or 50 years is going to be the future city. We've just been talking about citizen engagement, and probably it's fair to say that citizens have relatively little involvement in the making of the Dublin of today. And the question arises as to whether they will continue to be sidelined. Maybe if you look at the inner city, first of all, one of the things we don't talk about anymore much is the level of separation which the River Liffey provides. Kevin comes from Glasgow. There's huge, I suppose most cities are divided by rivers. You look at London as well. But I would say Dublin has actually made more inroads into healing, the division between north and south over the last 30 years. I mean, when you look at the inner city, it had a very shrunk footprint. The old CBD essentially in 1970s, 1980s. And since then, you have the movement of the city down to embrace docklands, the emergence of a whole set of new niche sectors, and the beginning of that recreation of the relationship of the city with the sea. And at the same time then, that inner city defined by the canals was moving westwards. And we see that arc of development constituted of Grange Gorman, Houston, now the Children's Hospital, Digital Hub, and Guinness, forming a counterpoint to Dockland. And I suppose what has emerged in terms of trying to structure that over 20, 30 years has been a local map of character areas, which really are about reflecting local character and trying to protect diversity. And at the same time then, public realm strategy being developed to generate unity and interconnection. And, despite the crash, quite a lot of infrastructure has been delivered. People are very proud of light rail in Dublin. We've had a convention centre, new theatres, the two stadiums just outside Canal Rings, and the Dublin Bike Scheme as well. And beyond the inner city, I think Ballymun has been one of the best social projects that has happened in Europe over 30 or 40 years. I think the North Fringe is one of those plans that's going to take a very long time to mature, but the basic infrastructure has been very strong in terms of a rail station, in terms of an urban spine, and an international park that is actually a 20 million implementation project at the heart of the North Fringe. I suppose regional Dublin has begun to consolidate. What we're seeing is a polycentric city between the new urban centres, which have actually developed, through a search for a new role for those counties. They're very robust centres emerging in Swords and Blanchardstown. And we have an international airport that has gone from 3 million in 1986 to 25 million now, and is a very successful hub. I suppose, those counties were not welcomed by everybody, but they're beginning to develop a strong sense of place. Tala has invested hugely in cultural dimensions, and it has fantastic theatre, library, arts hub, public space, and so on. And then we have had strange trade-off in Dunleary Down, where the income coming off a major suburban retail centre has gone to fund one of the best new libraries that I've seen anywhere in any city internationally. I suppose not to dwell too much on Dublin, but to say also that I think We've seen great work happen in centres like Kilkenny. I think there's been bravery in Cork, where they ploughed 40 or 50 million from the sale of Manor lands into the consolidation of the city centre in terms of a new public realm. I think the historic quarter in Waterford is absolutely phenomenal, and breaks new ground in terms of dealing with the concentration of historic treasures, and dealing with each of the buildings in an incredibly confident way, but also dealing with the public domain and the relatively ordinary buildings that make up the street pattern in between them. I think the vitality of Galway is enjoyed by everybody, and I think the small towns are inspirational along the Wild Atlantic way in terms of Dingle, Kenmare, but especially what we've seen in terms of collaboration in Westport. I suppose the trajectory of the city then, there's a lot of good things, and there's been a lot of bad things as well, and I won't dwell on those, but perhaps to maybe phrase them in terms of looking forward to the next 30 years. And things, I mentioned some things which I think are important. I think one thing is the planet crisis. We're all tied up with it. We're in the age of the Anthropocene, which is equivalent to a new geological age, but it's this time caused by 7 billion people living on the planet, and 20% of the Earth's surface is degraded. And yet, cities have kind of remained below the radar, because national governments are supposed to be doing the job, but they're ineffective. So, in a sense, cities are causing the problems, and we'll have to get their solutions. But I think what we need in terms of sustainability is to build some type of a new imagination that connects the citizen with the scale of the planet, with the scale of the city, and with the scale of the neighbourhood. A second area I would stress is the area of quality and qualities. What is the quality of what we are really building? I think we're being satisfied with a kind of fragmented urbanism. You look at the traditional European city, the street, the urban space, the campus institution are the fundamental building blocks used in every type of individual configuration to produce a unique sense of place. And we know what the qualities of those streets are. Cohesiveness, multiple entrances, mixed use, public life and the public domain, and so on. And everybody knows what those qualities are, wants to experience and go there. And yet, we don't seem to have been able to create one new street in the last 20 or 30 years. So maybe we do need to, instead of talking about principles, that we should get back to talking about qualities. Citizens know what they mean when they talk about, say, 10 great qualities of a neighbourhood. If we start from qualities and try and articulate what we mean by those qualities, maybe we can begin to develop strategies to deliver what people really enjoy and want. I suppose we've heard a little bit about citizen engagement, collaboration. My own view is that top down and bottom up don't meet very well at all. I'm very fond of a movie by Gary Hustwit, Urbanized, which looks at cities internationally. He spent 3.5 years trying to make sense of cities. He figured he couldn't. But he made a glorious movie in drawing out the issues. And he had one great phrase which said, if you don't shape your city, somebody else will shape it for you. And it's very, I think, ironic at the moment that Habitat 3 is out there in Pito, and 4,000 experts and city mayors and so on are meeting inside of a steel fence in the middle of the Central Park. And the fence there is to keep out the ordinary citizens and protest groups and so on. So despite all the lip service to the citizens' right to be involved, I think we have a huge, long way to go. And one of the problems, I think, is that we haven't used values enough, urban values. And because we haven't found a common way of achieving consensus on values, it allows the economic dimension always to take precedence. So I think if you're talking about a holistic approach, we need to get this metaphorical table where you can get the stakeholder groups and develop a core wide spectrum of issues from which to launch a platform. I think tied in with values is probably the issue of infrastructure. I used to hear Michael Phillips talking about the infrastructure which now serves the city being designed 130 years ago. You know, what is the value system that's driving the creation of infrastructure? Who commissions infrastructure? Who designs it? Who delivers it? Who manages it? Who does it serve and who does it not serve? So I suppose if you were to start from looking at infrastructure from the bottom up and think of personal infrastructure in terms of life skills, education, life experience and so on, I begin to look at the top-down infrastructures like the hard ones of buildings, utilities, public space, the top-down ones of soft infrastructure institutions again, who are our institutions serving, and then the bottom-up social and community capital, and finally the personal. I think it's an interesting way of interrogating the status quo in cities. There's just a couple of more fragments maybe that I might mention. One is the area of conservation. You know, conservation, I think the inner city Dublin is actually bleeding because of a lack of resolution in the area of conservation. There's about 1,000 houses in the north of Georgian core. You know, we might build a track to the airport, a tunnel to the airport, costing 2 or 3 billion. If we were to devote $500,000 to each of those 1,000 houses and ring fence the conservation of north of Georgian Dublin, I think it would do a huge amount to you know, consolidate the tentative movement north of the Liffey, which has been occurring. Dublin's inner city is a work in progress. Case Christensen of KCAP took a look at Dublin and 5 or 6 other cities, and he said the landscapes of value in Dublin were far below other cities such as Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Bilbao, and so on. I think part of the problem with conservation is that we've taken a very atomized look, a building by building approach. And you know, I think it's only in the last few years with examples, fantastic examples like Ainger Street, that we've begun to see the value of creating a red line around a particular area and really going in and attacking that challenge on multiple levels. I think we forget in Dublin, in terms of, you know, the factors and circumstances that have worked for us over 30 years, the value of agency in Dublin. You know, I think Temple Bar was hugely important for the city. Ballymun had its own agency, Docklands had, and there's a story there, but it did an awful lot of good work, and we still have Grangeforman. And, you know, with the crash, we tended to throw out agency. I think it's very difficult for a local authority to try and take on, you know, special roles in particular areas of the city. I think when you have maybe even half a dozen or 12 people with a specific task to look at the local area, but in a broad city context, I think you get much more. I just finished maybe on the Irish town. You know, it's always in the news. It's an amazing legacy. I think one of the problems about creating new places is somehow the chemistry. We haven't got it right, and regulation prevents us from creating those traditional qualities, as I mentioned, in the street. But when you have a framework to work with, it's amazing how successful regeneration can be. I think of my own town of Naas, where half a dozen strategic mistakes have been made over 20 years, which has actually torn the heart out of the centre of Naas. And as a sort of an antidote to that, I think of the Colby Centre in Naas, which is this amazing sheltered housing project in the old convent, which is first of all a great conservation project, but it also found funding for those 53 units. It has a cafe, it has an art centre, it has an Alzheimer's choir, it's making a fantastic new park and walled garden from what was there. And it's all driven by one person, but with an amazing amount of collaboration and volunteerism. And it's got this cross-institutional process and way of thinking and going on. And the person who really championed it, her arm was twisted for about a year to move to an out-of-town centre location and much larger funding. And she just said, no, I want to stay in the town centre, because there you had the mixing of the vitality of the town centre, its services, and the crossover of aspects of health and people getting older and mixing with a younger generation and mixing with all of those volunteer So I suppose essentially I'm a believer in urbanism. I always like to call myself an urbanist. I'm a planner, of course, but I think we need to come from our particular silos, and it's only through something like urbanism, which looks at everything in the round and develops a relational type thinking, that I think we avoid these problems of getting caught with that in a specific sideshow. So I think that example of the maze is a fantastic example of collaborative urbanism.